Canada is the second largest country on Earth, and most people picture it the same way everywhere. Quiet, orderly, politely uniform. Toronto sits inland on the shore of Lake Ontario, surrounded by flat suburban sprawl, and inside that sprawl, one of the most migration-shaped urban cores anywhere on the planet. Over half its residents were born in another country. Vancouver sits on the opposite edge of the continent, pinched between the Pacific Ocean and the Coast Mountains, built on a sliver of land where container. Ships, seaplanes, and cycling commuters share the same waterfront. 4,300 kilometres separate these two cities. Fly that distance in Europe and you would cross a dozen countries. In Canada, you cross 4 time zones and arrive in what feels like a different nation. That distance is not just geographic, it is cultural, economic, and increasingly political. Toronto draws people from everywhere. More than 200 ethnic origins are reported across the metropolitan area. The city's operating system, its transit, its food, its civic rhythms, was rebuilt by migration. Vancouver draws its identity from the land. Mountains set the northern wall. The Pacific sets the western edge. The port connects the city to Asia more directly than to most of Canada. These are not two versions of the same Canadian city. They are two separate experiments in what a modern city can become. The map explains why these cities diverged, but to understand how far apart they really are, you have to land in Vancouver first. Vancouver did not choose to be dense. The mountains and the ocean left it no alternative. Look at a topographic map and the constraint is immediate. The downtown peninsula juts into Burrard Inlet, bounded by water on 3 sides. Behind it, the North Shore Mountains rise to over 1,500 metres within 15 kilometres of the financial district. Between the ocean and those peaks, the buildable land is a narrow coastal strip. Vancouver could never sprawl the way other Canadian cities did. The glass towers cluster tight against the waterfront because there is nowhere else for them to go. The seawall, a 28-kilometre cycling and walking path, is not a luxury amenity. It is the most efficient way to move along the edge of a city with almost no room to widen. But here is the part most visitors miss entirely. That same waterfront they photograph at sunset is also the edge of Canada's busiest port. The Port of Vancouver handles over 140 million tonnes of cargo every year, more tonnage than any other port in the country. Container ships anchor in Burrard Inlet, waiting their turn beneath the Lions Gate Bridge while joggers pass on the seawall below. Seaplanes take off from Coal Harbour, just metres from where freighters load grain bound for Asia. Vancouver is not just a scenic city on the Pacific, it is a working port city that happens to be beautiful. The SkyTrain, one of the longest automated metro systems in the world, crosses False Creek on elevated track. Ferries shuttle commuters across the inlet. Cyclists share bridge lanes with freight trucks. In Vancouver, every form of movement is shaped by the same constraint. The land is narrow, the water is everywhere, and the mountains are always watching. Stanley Park is the proof that seals this argument, a 405-hectare temperate rainforest peninsula larger than Central Park sitting at the tip of downtown. In most cities, that land would have been developed decades ago. In Vancouver, the geography made it impractical to build on and too valuable to destroy. A dense financial district that ends where old growth forest begins, separated by a 5-minute walk. Almost no other major city on Earth can claim this. Even Granville Island follows the same logic. Once an industrial sandbar, it was redeveloped into a public market, but it still sits on the harbour inlet that defined its original purpose. Vancouver was shaped by land it could not move. Toronto was shaped by people who chose to move there. After Vancouver's mountain and harbour logic, Toronto feels like a different country, because in a sense, it is. Over half the people living in Toronto were born somewhere else. That is not a statistic, it is the operating system of the city. Most cities that call themselves diverse concentrate that diversity in a few famous streets. Toronto does something different. Immigration here does not funnel into one district, it fans out across the entire metropolitan area. Scarborough, in the east, is home to one of the largest Sri Lankan Tamil communities outside South Asia. North York to the north has Chinese, Korean and Iranian neighbourhoods layered across the same suburban blocks. Over 200 languages are spoken across the Greater Toronto area. That is not folklore. You can hear it on any suburban bus. Where Vancouver was compressed by terrain, Toronto simply kept expanding. The grid stretched and every wave of newcomers filled the next ring outward. But if you want to see this process concentrated into a few city blocks, there is one place that has been doing it for over a century. Kensington Market started as a Jewish immigrant neighbourhood in the early 1900s. Then came Portuguese families, Caribbean communities, Chinese merchants. Today the signage shifts from Tibetan to Ethiopian to Vietnamese within a single block. Each layer was left by a different generation of arrivals. This is not a tourist attraction preserved in amber. Kensington is a functioning neighbourhood where coexistence is just the daily default. The market works because the city lets it work. Zoning here allows mixed use. Residential sites above commercial. The street belongs to foot traffic. And the systems that connect Kensington to the rest of the city tell the same story at a larger scale. Toronto's transit routes were not designed around immigration, but immigration reshaped where and how those routes are used. Community health centres operate in dozens of languages. Multilingual signage is standard in public buildings. These are not gestures, they are infrastructure. Toronto did not just add diversity to existing systems. It rebuilt civic systems around the assumption that diversity is the baseline. Toronto receives roughly 100,000 new immigrants every year. That's a mid-sized city arriving annually, absorbed into the same transit, schools and hospitals. And yet Toronto is not a city that erased its past to build something new, it layered. St. Lawrence Market has operated as a public market since 1803. It predates Confederation. It predates every wave of mass immigration that followed. Today, a pea-meal bacon sandwich, Toronto's oldest civic snack, sits 3 stalls from a Caribbean paddy vendor. Old Canada and New Canada sharing the same roof. The market was not redesigned to accommodate newcomers, it simply kept functioning, and each generation of arrivals made it their own. This is what makes Toronto structurally different from most cities that claim diversity. The infrastructure assumes plurality. Transit, markets, zoning, all built on the expectation that newcomers will keep coming. Vancouver was forced into its shape by mountains and water. Toronto was reshaped, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, by the people who arrived. If you landed here from another country, Toronto would not ask you to become Canadian first. It would assume you already are. Vancouver is compressed by geography. Toronto is expanded by arrivals. But both cities share one thing. The promise they sell comes with a cost. What happens when the most desirable cities in Canada become the hardest to afford? Both cities regularly rank among the most livable in the world. Both also rank among the least affordable in Canada. That is not a coincidence. The same geography that makes Vancouver beautiful makes it expensive. The same migration that makes Toronto dynamic makes it crowded. Start with Vancouver, look at the city from above, and the problem becomes physical. Mountains to the north, ocean to the west, protected parkland, river delta, and water on nearly every other side. The city cannot sprawl, it can only stack, and when land is finite, every square metre of it becomes contested. Vancouver consistently ranks among the 3 least affordable housing markets in the English-speaking world. Not compared to other Canadian cities, compared to London, Sydney, Hong Kong. And just blocks from some of the most expensive real estate in Canada sits the downtown east side, one of the most visible concentrations of urban hardship in North America. A 15-minute walk separates extreme wealth from extreme need. Geography made them neighbours. Now look at Toronto. The terrain is flat. The land in theory is abundant, and yet the pressure is just as real. The Greater Toronto Area absorbs more newcomers per year than most mid-sized countries receive in total. Every year the city builds, and every year the city grows faster than it builds. The average home price in Toronto now exceeds $1 million Canadian dollars. Immigration is the engine of Toronto's economy, but engines need infrastructure to support them. Transit lines designed for a smaller city now carry millions more riders than they were built for. In the inner suburbs, post-war towers built for a different era now house some of the densest populations in Canada. The stretch between downtown wealth and outer ring affordability grows wider every year. By now, the pattern is clear. Vancouver was built by geography. Toronto was built by migration. Both stories are real. Both are incomplete without the next question. The very qualities that make these cities desirable also make them difficult to live in on ordinary terms. Vancouver's scenic compression means there is almost nowhere left to build. Toronto's migration-powered growth means demand outpaces housing, transit and infrastructure year after year. They share the top of Canada's housing cost rankings, not for the same reason but through mirror image mechanisms. One city ran out of land. The other cannot build fast enough for the people who keep arriving. The second half of this story is about what happens when a city's greatest strength becomes its most visible pressure. And whether that pressure is a sign of failure or evolution. These two cities are not just different from each other, they are both, quietly, under strain. Both cities are under pressure, but the question is whether that pressure is breaking them or forcing them to evolve. These are not two sides of the same coin, they are two coins minted in the same country. Vancouver was shaped by what was already there. Mountains hemmed the city in, the Pacific opened it outward. Its harbour connects more directly to Tokyo and Shanghai than to Ottawa. Its terrain dictates where people can live and how they move. Toronto was shaped by who showed up. Wave after wave of arrivals rebuilt the city from the inside out. Its neighbourhoods do not just reflect migration, they run on it. Markets, transit lines, schools, civic rhythms, all shaped by the people who came. Most countries have one dominant city model that gets replicated everywhere. Canada does not. Its two largest cities developed on opposite logics. One was built by migration, the other was built by geography, and neither one absorbed the other. That makes Canada unusual. Its national identity is not converging, it is diverging through its cities. Canada's identity is not being decided in Ottawa. It is being built daily in Toronto and Vancouver. Between these two cities lies an enormous country. Prairies, small towns, resource economies, French-speaking communities, Indigenous nations. That country still exists, but the future is being prototyped on the edges in two very different laboratories. Vancouver is becoming a Pacific city. Its trade routes, its real estate markets, its cultural gravity all tilt westward across the ocean. It will keep growing vertically because there is nowhere else to go. The mountains and the ocean decided that long ago. Toronto is becoming a global arrival city. It absorbs more immigrants per year than most mid-sized countries. Its neighbourhoods will keep reinventing themselves, not because of policy, but because the people inside them keep changing. Together, these two cities generate roughly a third of Canada's entire economic output. They sit in different time zones, different climates, different ecosystems. A Vancouverite commutes past rainforest and harbour. A Torontonian commutes through a grid built by 100 different homelands. Same country, same passport, completely different daily experience of what it means to live in Canada. Understanding Canada now means understanding that its cities are not variations on one theme. They are distinct experiments running simultaneously under the same flag. Canada's immigration targets keep rising. The majority of newcomers still land in Toronto or Vancouver, which means the forces shaping each city are not slowing down, they are accelerating. The gap between these two city worlds is not closing, it is widening, and that is not a failure, it is how Canada actually works. Fly that same distance in Europe and you would cross a dozen countries. In Canada, you cross one, but you land in a different world. Neither city is the real Canada, neither one tells the whole story. But together, they explain something most outsiders never see, that Canada's identity is not settled. It is being built in real time. In two very different laboratories, on opposite edges of the same enormous country. One city was remade by who arrived, the other was remade by the land it sits on. Together, they explain a Canada most people have never imagined. There are 300 kilometres between Toronto and Vancouver, and almost none of it looks like either city. Fly that distance in Europe and you would cross a dozen countries, a dozen languages, a dozen histories. In Canada, you cross one country, but you land in a completely different world. Vancouver will keep being shaped by its mountains and its harbour, by the Pacific trade routes that connect it more naturally to Asia than to Ottawa. Toronto will keep being shaped by the people who arrive, by the neighbourhoods that absorb them, by the civic rituals that turn strangers into residents. Neither city defines Canada alone. Together they show a country still shaping its identity. It is being built in real time, in two very different laboratories, on opposite edges of the same enormous country. Toronto and Vancouver do not contradict each other. They prove that Canada's identity lives in its range, not its uniformity. The next time someone tells you what Canada is like, ask them which Canada they mean, because the answer depends entirely on where they landed,